Who
We'll
is
see.
Zelensky exactly? How would you characterize Zelensky?
Hi, I'm Joe Lindsley, American in Lviv, responding to my old colleague Tucker Carlson and retired American Colonel Douglas Macgregor.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Well, Zelensky.
George W. Bush called him our generation's Winston Churchill.
Well, this is W, right?
Yeah.
Not a very thoughtful man. He was a comedian who made a living acting on stage, frequently pretending to be a transvestite, doing things with various body parts that I won't go into. And he was picked up by an oligarch named Kolomoisky.
Yeah, Volodymyr Zelensky was an entertainer before he entered into politics, much like Donald Trump was before he ran for president. And actually, lots of Zelensky's comedic work in those years was in the Russian language. It was for Russian-centric media, which really bothered a lot of very pro-Ukraine people who spoke Ukrainian language, because very often Zelensky, the comedian, would make fun of Ukrainian speakers. All that began to change when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And in 2019, when the Ukrainian people were choosing their president, unlike most ex-Soviet republics, Ukraine chooses a new president every 5 years. And in 2019, when Ukrainians were choosing their president, there was a deep sense they did not want an oligarch. In fact, in many ways, that election, the two of the top contenders were Zelensky, the comedian, and Ukraine's top rock star. And so the Ukrainians wanted to get away from this oligarch mentality, and so they chose a comedian and an entertainer.
Kolomoisky is the individual who's probably more responsible than anybody else for funding this atrocity we call the Azov regiment that runs around with the swastikas and Nazi gear and so forth.
Yeah, Kolomoisky, a bad guy, bad news. Azov is a different story. In 2014, when the Ukrainians had their revolution, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets throughout the country, and they succeeded in kicking out the corrupt pro-Putin regime. They even succeeded in getting rid of the secret police. But because of that, in many cities, there was not structure, and the Russians came in to try to take advantage of the opportunity to seize Ukrainian cities, among them Odessa, Mariupol, Kharkiv. And in the city of Mariupol, people banded together, regular citizens, top intellectuals, as well as the football hooligans. And in many ways, it was like the Cajun Navy in Texas and Louisiana rallying to support people. People took to the streets, and they defended their city from the Russians, preventing Mariupol in 2014 from falling into Russian hands. Those were chaotic, wild days. You can always find some bad apple and some bad patch somewhere. But from that, Azov became a very fierce and disciplined fighting force, including with many with Israelis part of it, and many Jewish people part of it. I have a Jewish friend who grew up as neighbors and childhood friends with the leader, one of the leaders of Azov. And so this is absolutely ridiculous to say. If you attack Azov, you're attacking basically the Cajun Navy of Europe. Azov is people defending their homeland, very tolerant, Muslims, Christians, and Jews working for freedom.
And he was picked and then blessed by Victoria Nuland and the State Department as their man.
Victoria Nuland, the way some people talk about her, she must be one of the most powerful people ever to have walked on this planet. Look, 2014, Ukraine's Revolution of Dignity, there were hundreds of thousands of people in cities throughout the country demanding their freedom. It really began because the secret police, run by the pro-Putin regime in Kyiv, began to attack a small group of student protesters, and that woke up the nation. And finally, they said, this is our moment to strike for freedom. And obviously, when they did that, wild freedom is not just the enemy of Moscow, but also of bureaucratic people in the West. And people like Victoria Nuland and many, many, many others wanted to mitigate that wild freedom that was unleashed here in Ukraine. And so, of course, they tried to manage the situation. That's what bureaucrats do, and they like to pretend that they are the world historical chess players. But there's no way that one woman at the State Department got Ukrainians to leave their homes, go to the squares of all their cities, to withstand the bullets of the secret police, to sleep in the squares for an entire winter, and in an incredible way. I mean, the stories from Maidan, when the police left and the regime fled, there was really no authority in Ukraine for several weeks, and yet there was hardly any crime. There was no looting. It was Ukrainians as a society standing against totalitarianism, against bureaucratic, Soviet-minded evil. And this should be something that we all appreciate and applaud, especially people like Tucker Carlson. And then, moreover, there was one president Ukrainians elected right after the revolution, and then a whole other cycle later, 2019, President Zelenskyy was elected by the people, probably in more highly observed and secure elections than we've had in the United States recently. And so it's preposterous to say that one woman in the State Department organized all of this. You would really need to provide your evidence for that.
Now, when he originally ran for office, he ran on a peace platform. And he was overwhelmingly elected across the country because he said, if I am elected as your president, I will make peace with Russia.
Yeah, that's true. Zelenskyy ran on a platform which many of his critics said was one of appeasement. And we can look back at, it sounds nice at the time. Look back at Neville Chamberlain in the 1930s. Let's try to make a deal with this enemy. And many people were hoping for that, even though Russia was already occupying portions of Ukraine. And we see the result of that. Ukraine was not really quite prepared for that full-scale invasion. But in that moment, Zelenskyy transformed. He became a totally different person. But it's important to remember that, he probably was the Kremlin's favorite candidate before when he was elected in 2019, because he was a softer voice. And they probably thought it'd be easier to push around a comedian and an entertainer than any other type of person. But they were wrong.
Ukrainians didn't want to go to war with Russia. They were looking for a way out of this and a resolution to the crisis. Of course, once he was in there, he took a different road. And I can't help but think that road was defined for him by us.
Colonel Macgregor, you got to be precise and honest here. Once he was in there, he carried out his policies of relative appeasement, trying to make peace. But the once is not the moment that you say. The moment of change, the deciding point, was February 24th, 2022, when Russia invaded. That's what changed everything. That's what changed President Zelenskyy. And, I think it's easy to forget that he could have fled the country, and people would still have respected him. In World War II, kings and queens and prime ministers from continental Europe fled. They went to the UK, they went to Canada, and that was accepted then. But what Zelenskyy did was extraordinary in choosing to stay in Kyiv when the Russians were trying to hunt him down and kill him. They wanted to kill him, and he refused to flee. And even the people, the Ukrainians who were critics of Zelenskyy before, they were critics of him for being an appeaser of Moscow. And they didn't trust him because he had been a Russian-speaking comedian working for Russian-centric television. They didn't trust him, but his action of choosing to stay here transformed probably Zelenskyy himself, and transformed the perception of President Zelenskyy throughout Ukraine. So these are the facts we have to look at, rather than sort of just accept these little weird data points that people like Tucker and Colonel Macgregor like to focus on, without looking at the true story and narrative. And it's a sad thing, because you would think that people who really do love freedom and want to pursue truth are actually missing the greatest story, the most dire and serious, but also the greatest story of a struggle for freedom in our generation, in our time. And that's the story of the Ukrainian people. That revolution of 2014, the revolution of dignity, is like 1,000,000 times more than what the Ottawa truckers were doing in Canada. Ukrainians stood in that square of Kyiv in 2014. They faced the bullets of the secret police. And because of that, because they won back their freedom for a few years, that's the very reason why Russia is spending millions of dollars a day to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones. But that's why Ukrainians are not giving up. And we got to start by looking at the facts. So, thanks.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important, that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав?
Which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Come on now. Which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні? свідомо.